Hi, everybody. I wanted to briefly welcome everyone to today's event. First, Northwestern Medill IMC really wants to extend a sincere thanks to everyone at Draftfcb and all of our TalentQ supporters. Without your help, we couldn't be putting on this whole series for the students. So a little background for today. In 1903, Walter Dill Scott, a psychologist and faculty member at Northwestern, wrote a book entitled The Psychology of Advertising. Albert Lasker, in that same year, standing at the frontier of advertising, found the book inspiring and adopted many of its principles as the founding pillars of Lord and Thomas. Scott and Lasker met and became friends, and that was the beginning of a relationship between Northwestern and Draftfcb that has been mutually beneficial and richly rewarding for more than a century. So that all started with a moment of inspiration, and Clark Street Bridge, while hard to define, is all about inspiration as well. The kind you can carry along with you as you walk out the door 90 minutes from now. There are no special skills required today, just a little patience. So with that in mind, we kindly request you keep questions until the end, and if you feel inclined to applaud, please wait until the end as well. Additionally, we request that you shut off all cell phones and laptops for today's event, but mostly just wait, enjoy the experience, and let it all come to you. So here we are. Let's give an introduction to Clark Street Bridge.
William Sapphire cannot sleep tonight. He lights a cigarette and rolls a clean sheet of 8.5 by 11 into his Smith Corona manual typewriter. He stares at it for a minute. It's 1969. Until this year, no one had even uttered the phrase, walk on the moon, let alone considered the implications. A few hours ago, he had told Haldeman he'd write something for the president, just in case. And tonight, just as he's finishing the last cigarette in his pack, he will have completed the best speech ever written and never delivered. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery, but they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding. They will be mourned by their families and friends. They will be mourned by the people of the world. They will be mourned by a Mother Earth that dared send two of her sons into the unknown. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one. In their sacrifice, they bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at the stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same, but our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. But these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. man with a basket of bread is walking down a deserted alleyway in the mist of early morning in the city of Padua, Italy, in the year 1604. He stops to listen. Someone is singing a song, the same song, over and over again. The same song, over and over again. Its beauty is by chance, sung today, not for art, but for science. Galileo is doing a little experiment on motion, using metal balls, a wooden incline, and a song to measure the time because he has no clock. Something set in motion stays in motion, he would find, until it is stopped by something else. Whether it is a metal ball, the stars in the distant galaxies, or an idea. For as long as there has been art and science, science has been the pursuit of the reproducible answer, and art has been the pursuit of the unanswerable question. All of this was set in motion a long, long time ago, and it will stay in motion until it is stopped by something else. The calliope hummingbird weighs only as much as a penny, but each year it migrates from Canada to Mexico and back, a round trip of 5,000 miles. Something set in motion stays in motion until it is stopped by something else. The poet W.S. Merwin would say, "See how the past is not finished here in the present. It is awake the whole time." Before you became you, you were a moment in time, a happy millisecond or so. And in that moment, the time it took to fertilize an egg, you became something that could be scientifically measured. You were 1/200th of an inch in diameter. You were a set of instructions. You were data sent floating into the cavity of the womb. You had within your nucleus 250,000 pairs of genes, each one a book of knowledge, handed down and handed down again with notes in the margin. When you became newborn you, your mother and father gave you a name, which, as parents do, they immediately turn into a dozen different nicknames. You listen carefully to each one: Buddy, Bruiser, Bubba. Sounds of each frequency activate a particular cluster of receptors in your inner ear, which pass signals to corresponding nerve cells at ever higher levels of your brain. The signals travel inward, as though melodies were being played on a piano, projected from your inner ear. Then again by a new diatonic scale at way stations in your hindbrain. Next at the inferior colliculi of your midbrain and the medial geniculate bodies of your forebrain. And finally, at the auditory cortex, where somehow, beyond our present understanding, beyond what science can explain, your mind hears the sound. And perhaps it is at this moment, at the very first live concert of your life, perhaps this is where art begins. And if science falls just a little bit short of being able to explain it, maybe that's okay. For now, the wonder of it, the art of it, is more than enough. When I was a child, reminisces naturalist Scott Wiedensaul, my mother had long blonde hair that fell well below her waist. In spring and summer, shortly after daybreak, she would carefully brush it out while sitting on the back porch. After cleaning the brush, she'd place a handful of long, golden hair in a rose bush that climbed a trellis by the steps. Later, when I began to show an interest in birds, I discovered that in our neighborhood, almost every chipping sparrow, a species that for much of America's history lined its nest with horsehair, was laying its eggs in a neatly woven nest of long golden hair. In the time of Alexander II, at a moment in history when Russia felt awkward, if not backward on the world stage, books suddenly flooded into the country. Books with brazen new titles like Physiology of Common Life, Reflexes of the Brain, and On the Origin of Species. Books that were allowed into the country by the Tsar himself. The same books that were banned by his father, Nicholas I. And in the town of Rizhan, a young, resourceful student bribed the town librarian to leave open a window so that he might, in the middle of the night, crawl through and be the first to read the pages of Ivan Sekhanov and Charles Darwin. You can expect good things to come from somebody who loves books that much. And Ivan Pavlov did not disappoint. The 4 sending notes you're hearing, F, G, A, and B, were just one of the stimuli Pavlov trained his beloved dogs to recognize. They meant food, as opposed to these 4 descending notes, which meant no food, bad music. And as Galileo was the father of science, Pavlov was its rebellious son. Galileo wrote the rules, Pavlov broke them. He began to see that science was not only the measurable, the reproducible answer. It might also be the immeasurable, the unanswerable question. Pavlov was smart enough and brash enough to see beyond the definition of science at the time. He would always be the one crawling through the open window. His observations were scientific, but they were also thoughtful. Sure, he could play 4 notes and get a dog to salivate, but he could produce the same result with just the click of the lock on the research room door. Salivation, what he was observing more and more, were feelings of hunger, much like the sound of your nickname as it echoed up into the far reaches of your brain. Pavlov was observing behavior that kept going up into the parts of the brain where science had never gone before. Pavlov himself said he was moving from the measurable world to the immeasurable. If there was a line in the sand where science ended and art began, Pavlov stepped across it. Pavlov had crawled in through the window of the library, and he had thrown open the books.
Flying under cover of night, nothing in my way, no bird of prey in sight, but something's not right. Just out of the corner of my eye, falling under veil of sea, sunk to the bottom, tucked beneath the rocks and weeds. How happy I'd be to know that you would never find me singing sparrows, this heart full of flowers and broken arrows, crawling on hand and knee, blood under fingernails, silent prayers end with please. I hear breaking leaves. Is that you? Are you watching me? And these thoughts like thunder and singing sparrows, this heart full of flowers and broken arrows.
A guy named Bill and a girl named Wendy are about to go over Niagara Falls. Wendy sits in an inner tube and lets the 30-kilometer-per-hour velocity of the river throw her out horizontally over the falls. Bill paddles a kayak, adding an extra 10 kilometers per hour to his velocity. If they go over the edge of the falls at precisely the same moment, side by side, how long will it take them to fall in love? I thought some of you were going to solve that for me, but anyway. We see the universe the way it is because we exist. If it had been different, we wouldn't be here to notice it. Things are as they are because we are. It is ironic that some of the most beautiful and compelling thoughts in our language were first made audible by a voice synthesizer. Welcome to the world of Stephen Hawking, a world that wouldn't exist if things were even slightly different. Stars wouldn't have exploded in supernovas, flinging back into space the raw material for more stars, like our sun, or planets like our Earth, if gravity were even slightly less powerful than it is. It couldn't have pulled matter together into stars and galaxies. Things are as they are because we are. Art and science live together in the unique space that is Stephen Hawking's mind, and it makes us wonder, how can his mind be so different than ours? The second law of black hole dynamics, which even in layman's terms I barely understand, and states that the border of a black hole can stay the same or increase, but never decrease. The second law came to him one night as he was, as assistant was preparing him for bed. He lay awake the rest of the night, working it out in his head. No computer, no slide rule, not even a notepad. Stephen Hawking is one of a handful of people on the planet who can do that. He is perhaps the most respected, science-minded person of our time. And yet he doesn't stay safe and cozy, tucked away at the science end of the art and science spectrum. He balances his unsurpassed knowledge of science by embracing art. He's not a painter or a sculptor or a composer, but he brings to his writing about science a sensibility that can be best described as human. His book, A Brief History of Time, has been described as a marriage of a child's wonder with a genius's intellect. Charming and lucid, an engaging combination of clarity and wit. Stephen Hawking surrounds the obscure with the obvious. Armed with an incredibly powerful scientific mind, he reaches across the aisle and meets art in the middle. The result is a science book that sold 10 million copies and begins with a joke. It's a science joke. A well-known scientist once gave a public public lecture on astronomy, he described how the Earth orbits around the sun, and how the sun, in turn, orbits around a vast collection of stars called our galaxy. At the end of the lecture, a little old lady, or could have been a little old man, at the back of the room got up and said, "What you have told us is rubbish. The world is really a flat plate, supported on the back of a giant tortoise." The scientist gave a superior smile before replying, "What is the tortoise standing on?" "You're very clever, young man, very clever," said the old lady, "but it's turtles all the way down." It's a science joke. Stephen Hawking's belief in the interrelatedness of knowledge is not new. In fact, it is a belief he shares with scientists throughout history. Sir Isaac Newton believed that the same force responsible for the fall of an apple held the planets in their orbits, and he proved it. James Clerk Maxwell combined electricity, magnetism, and light into a single unified theory called electromagnetism. And space and time were joined together in one space-time continuum by none other than Albert Einstein. Today, Stephen Hawking is perhaps the most visible member of a small group of highly respected scientists and humanists who are pursuing what's called the singularity of knowledge. He himself is in search of the theory of everything. Just the name, theory of everything, makes me feel a bit small, but at the same time oddly hopeful. It would be a unifying theory meant to discover the common ground between Einstein's theory of relativity and the other competing or complementary theories like string theory. Joining him in this search for the singularity of knowledge is E.O. Wilson, the Harvard biologist, who believes that all knowledge is intrinsically unified, and that behind disciplines as diverse as physics and biology, anthropology, and the arts lie a small number of natural laws, truths, whose intertwining tapestry he calls consilience. That's his word. Using the natural sciences as his model, Wilson forges dramatic links between fields. He explores the chemistry of thought and the genetics of culture. He talks about the fundamental biology underlying works of art, from cave drawings to Lolita. When asked recently in a New York Times interview, what do the sciences have to learn from the arts, he had a one-word answer: everything. E.O. Wilson is the guy you want at your next cocktail party. He takes a leisurely stroll through the entire spectrum of human knowledge and synthesizes it into one dazzling, poetic whole. It is the ultimate ordering of the wonders of the universe. And neatly shelved among those wonders are the thoughts on art and science, living together peacefully in essays, in poems, and papers on life sciences, lessons in life, and still lifes, and taught in classes like economics or sociology or even genetics, where, at least in my imagination, the correct answer on the final exam is the recitation of Tom Joad's speech in The Grapes of Wrath. I'll be around in the dark. I'll be everywhere. Wherever you look, wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when folks eat the stuff they raise and live in the houses they build, I'll be there. Just as science enlightens art, art illuminates science. And what of Wendy and Bill? Last we left them, they were suspended over the falls of Niagara. Nobody could solve the problem. Wendy in her inner tube and Bill in his kayak, two characters in a physics play. And as much as we might hope there's a finite number of solutions to their problem, as soon as we introduced the notion of love into the otherwise measurable elements of their story, the solutions went from finite to infinite. That's one of the wonderful things about marriage, at least the marriage of art and science. You have to make the leap over the falls from what you can prove to what you're willing to believe. The part they didn't tell you about today, that you're actually going to write something. And they're two short things, and nobody has been hurt ever doing this, so not to worry. And they don't take long, so if you absolutely hate it, it's over quickly. But this is a writing exercise. I think you all picked up a notebook on the way in. And you have about 6 minutes to do this, so don't overthink it. But answer this question in a single paragraph. What is the one thing about myself that I believe, but I cannot prove? The one thing about yourself that you believe, but cannot prove. Okay, about 6 minutes. Okay, try to wrap up in another minute and a half. Don't overthink it. Something you believe about yourself you can't prove. Okay, as you're finishing up, I'd like to have a few people here on the stage introduce themselves. There's some incredibly interesting people up here, and I'm not one of them. But I'd like for you to meet the members of the band, and they're going to introduce themselves and tell you a little about each one. Susan, if you'd like to start.
Hi, I'm Susan Dubs, and I play violin, electric violin, and I'm a founding member of a band called Koi.Con. I toured with Alejandro Escobedo, Ronnie Reed, and briefly John Mellencamp, like all around the world. And when I finished touring for a while, I wrote a book about it, and now I've decided I should teach how to play this instrument here. And I'm super happy to be on stage playing this.
Thanks, Susan.
My name is Cheryl Wilson. Oh, do you want me to talk louder? Okay. That's hard for me to do. My name is Cheryl Wilson. I have a Bachelor of Music in Viola Performance. I've played with the Toledo Symphony, the Atlanta Symphony, the Chicago Philharmonic, the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, the Chicago Jazz Orchestra. I'm currently playing the Joffrey Ballet Orchestra right now, a run that's completing this weekend with Human Landscapes. I'm also a singer. I've made my living as a singer and a violist. As a singer, I've recorded and appeared with Celine Dion, Michael Jackson, Mavis Staples, P.O. Bryson, Bill Withers, Smashing Pumpkins, the heavy metal band KMFDM. I've also done commercials. You guys have heard me your whole lives. Done commercials for Coca-Cola, McDonald's. I just finished a commercial for a Toyota that's mixing as we sit here. I also teach jazz voice and jazz studies at UIC and at Roosevelt University. And I am honored and thrilled to be right here on this stage with such artists that are up here.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Gray is my name, and I have a pretty wide-ranging, eclectic background. I actually have a master's degree in cello performance. I got a little later in life, but it's primarily that I'm known as a double bass player, particularly in the jazz field, but I've also played a lot of classical music. I've played with a number of great jazz artists over the last almost 30 years now. I toured around the world with the Ramsey Lewis Trio for 12 years, and lately I'm really, well, actually I've always taught, but in the last 6 years I took a job at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, where I'm a professor of jazz studies, and I'm enjoying working with the students there, and I'm happy and honored to be here with John and the whole gang as well.
I'm also pretty bad at talking loudly, so I'll use the mic. But my name's Heather Smith, and I run a band here in town called Bone and Bell. I play a few different instruments. I sing, obviously, I write songs. I'm also a visual artist, which is actually what I've done predominantly in my career. I'm an illustrator for a Highlights magazine, the kids magazine, and all the dentist offices that you've all been in. Yeah, that one. And I also have my own company doing interactive design and development, focusing on emerging media, actually, so like iPads and iPhones and stuff like that. So I'm a little techie and a little arty, and really happy to be here. So thanks.
I'm Christian Cullen. I think I'm the group goofball. No, I can't verify that. Today I'm a keyboard player, guitar player. Other days I'm a bass player, producer. Other days I do music for baby toys. Some days I'm doing music for video games and animation. I spent the last 5 years playing in arena rock bands. You may know the band Sister Christian, or Night Ranger is the band. They played, what song did they play? Oh yeah. So I played in that band for about 5 years. We toured the world. And the band's not called Sister Christian, but it should have been. So we were out with Styx and Styx and REO Speedwagon and So I got to see a lot of debauchery, and it was fun. So, but I'm glad to be off the road and back in Chicago and back in the studio and producing again. And I'm just so honored and blessed to be playing with such brilliant musicians. And John, this is just absolutely fantastic to do this with you. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Boyle. I'm just a hillbilly. I don't know how I ended up here. I write jingles for a living. I own a music company called Catfish Music, and I've written 1,756 radio and TV spots. And I make records that few people ever hear. And I live out in the country with my wife and my 12-year-old boy. And I, too, am glad to be here with my mentor, Mr. John Claxton. You can give him a round of applause.
See, I told you they were much more interesting than I am. William and Rachel, if you can help me with some names, we're going to take a listen to what you guys wrote, and we'll start with volunteers. And there's always plan B, but we'll start with volunteers. Plan B. Okay. Second to the last in the blue, the bright, yes. Yeah, can you help me, William? Annie. Stand up, please. Thank you so much. That's nice. That's real nice. Okay, second one's usually easier. Volunteers for the second one. Yes. Will I have to stand? If I give you $10, will you stand? Helen, you don't have to stand as long as you're very loud. Okay. Yeah. I'm looking for the right comeback. It's just a. Excellent. Okay, next. Somebody over here. Yeah, third, yes, the one who's laughing, yes. William, we don't know her. That's nice. Very nice. Yeah. And how about you? And I'm sorry, you told me your name, but I don't remember. Me? Yes, Eric.
I actually wrote something very similar. I believe I'm a funny person, but I can't prove it. I can give examples of jokes I told that made people laugh, but case studies aren't solid evidence. I generally think that humor is important in life, which shouldn't be taken so seriously. Therefore, I try to entertain people and bring humor to life.
Nice. That's a worthwhile goal. Yeah. Someone over here. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm unique. My perspective on love, hatred, justice, music, films, life in general, not exactly like anybody else's. And so is my perception of myself.
Okay. Any themes here that we're finding yet? Not yet? Okay, let's do a few more here. Somebody in this row. How about with the black scarf and the yes. Yes, thank you. Real loud. I know that feeling, yes. Excellent. And one of you three gentlemen here. Yeah, the one you pointed at.
I don't think I can make the room laugh like that. But one thing I truly believe is that I'm special, that I'm meant for great things. I'm sure everyone feels that way, but I think I truly believe in it. I haven't been very successful in the past, so I guess the belief is unfounded. I'm always on the quest for
That's really nicely done. Did you mean it to be funny, or did you mean it to be serious? Just curious. Okay, and I'm sorry, you. And I do know your name. Rachel, thank you.
I believe I am most human when I dance. I never feel as deeply or as express as clearly when I'm not dancing. It is as if I am outside of myself and inside of humanity, and it proves that language is not sophisticated enough to express.
Amen.
That's lovely. It's fun. I've done this many times, and there are always two or three that just leave you speechless. And yes.
I'm in love, I believe, but I cannot prove. I'm a dreamer, I believe, but I cannot prove. I dance and connect to God like no way, but I cannot prove. I'm God's child, but I cannot prove.
Thank you. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. And sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. She was the most beautiful woman in the world. She dropped out of school when she was 16 to become a professional actress. Born in Austria, she came to America alone and taught herself the language by watching her favorite films in English over and over again. She walked onto a movie lot and got a job as a script girl. And months later, Louis B. Mayer offered her a contract, which was the Hollywood dream every young girl dreamed at the time. She turned it down. She asked for more money, and she got it. And that moment is maybe the most revealing moment in the true story that is the life of Hedy Lamarr. Her story is a story of remarkable trust, trust in herself, trust in her own instincts, and trust is at the heart of every bold decision. She would look at what was presented before her, the same things everyone was looking at, but where others saw the mundane, Hedy Lamarr saw possibilities. She trusted in herself, and trust is at the heart of every bold decision. She made the films she wanted to make, when she wanted to make them. She starred in about a dozen or so, some of which we still value as art today: Tortilla Flat, Samson and Delilah, White Cargo. And on an otherwise inauspicious evening, a few days before Christmas in 1938, while she was deciding on a headdress festooned with peacock feathers and jewels that would become her signature, she was also applying for United States patent number 2,292,387. She was the most beautiful woman in the world. But she was also one of its most imaginative inventors. Meanwhile, almost a century earlier, in an America where Hedy Lamarr's Hollywood wasn't even a dream yet, Abraham Lincoln read and wrote and spoke like few other Americans, before or since. If you have a rainy afternoon or two, you can read not what Abraham Lincoln read, but the list of what he read. It's 82 pages long and includes Aesop's Fables, a grammar of the Latin language, Jane Austen, the speeches of Thomas Hart Benton, the poems of Robert Browning and George Byron, the American classics of James Fenimore Cooper, and on and on and on. The 82-page bibliography is in alphabetical order and ends, ironically, with the Edward Young poem, The Last Day. Abraham Lincoln was a man of letters, a phrase you don't hear much anymore. He loved the written word, and he spoke it eloquently. As I would not be a slave, so would I not be a master. This expresses my idea of democracy. He believed in the power of language to persuade, but it was a nifty bit of science, just slightly ahead of its time, that captured his imagination. It was one of the nation's first statistical maps, showing the distribution of the slave population of the southern states of the United States, compiled from the census of 1860. It documents the percentage of slaves county by county. Today, we would call it an infographic. But this visual display of simple math had a profound effect on Abraham Lincoln. It became his talisman of sorts. He would refer to it when the war turned bleak and bloody. He would have it included in the Francis Bicknell Carpenter painting, first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation of President Lincoln. He would turn to it as visible proof, a graphic answer, when he himself had questions. The man of letters, it turns out, was also a man of science. When people make the leap of faith from art to science, or science to art, They often bring much of the world with them. Abraham Lincoln brought a nation. Hedy Lamarr, 100 years later, brought the world. She invented spread spectrum radio, a method for rapidly switching communication signals among a range of different frequencies, sometimes called frequency hopping. It is the foundation for Bluetooth networks, GPS devices, most military communications, and the cell phone. Hedy Lamarr holds the patent for the technology that makes the cell phone possible. It was partly because of her strong will, and partly because she wanted to show her patriotism, being an Austrian immigrant, that she herself went before Congress to convince them of the immediate value of her invention to a country, her adopted country at that, at a time of war. They didn't listen. She was, after all, the most beautiful woman in the world, and who could take her seriously? It wasn't until 1997 that she received the prestigious Electronic Frontier Foundation Award. Life takes time. She was then 82, still the most beautiful woman in the world. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I'm standing in a field of an abandoned farm in northeastern Iowa. On this clear night in early spring, the sky's filled with stars. I hear the call of an indigo bunting, a bird common to the Great Plains, known for its brilliant blue coloring. In its nest, 3 baby buntings are instinctively memorizing the movement of the stars in the night sky. If you get in a car and drive north from here, you travel through the heartland of America, which, in many ways, has become the heartbreak of America. Here, the farms have become corporations, and the great ranches that once defined the spirit of the American West have become dust and silence. Nonetheless, even as late as 2005, the Glen School, a one-room schoolhouse in Sioux County, Nebraska, was still recognized by the state of Nebraska. That fall, when it opened its doors, 3 students eagerly took their seats. 1 6th grader, 1 7th grader, and 1 8th grader. And 2 of them were brothers. Many things are done correctly in a one-room schoolhouse, said their teacher, Moni Hurt, in an NPR interview from that year. And she's not wrong. If there's validation to be found in a list of famous one-room schoolhouse graduates, there's certainly that. Joyce Carol Oates, Alan Shepard, Jimmy Wales, Herbert Hoover. And the graduates are not just the famous, but also the brilliant, most notably one of Stephen Hawking's doctoral students, Don Page, a theoretical physicist himself. But there's more to it than that. It's more than charm and nostalgia. It's more than Little House on the Prairie. Year after year, for more than 100 years, the 8th graders at Glen School would help the 1st graders when the teacher was busy. The 2nd graders couldn't help but hear what the 6th graders were learning. And art and science were separated by the time it took to erase the chalkboard. Every student felt needed because they were. Every student felt loved because they were. And what they carried home with them every day, along with their dog-eared textbooks and half-eaten lunches, was a shared experience. A moment in time they would have and hold on to for the rest of their life. And for some, never quite have again. Mrs. Hurt begins the lesson for the day, as she often does, by asking a question. Are you an artist or a scientist? The 6th grader, the 7th grader, and the 8th grader, it being the first day of school and all, are stumped. They sit in silence. Mrs. Hurt helps get things started. Galileo once said, "Measure what is measurable and make measurable what is not." Would you say he was more of an artist or more of a scientist? Scientist, offers the 8th grader, sounding confident. The other 2 students nod in agreement. And why is that? Because science measures things, he says. Good, and what about this quote? Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. Who would have said that, an artist or a scientist? An artist, the 6th grader says with conviction. Yes, Picasso, in fact. And what about Leonardo da Vinci, asked Mrs. Hurt. Was he an artist or a scientist? She stumped them again. He who is fixed to a star does not change his mind, she says. That's something Da Vinci said. Does it tell you that he was more of an artist or more of a scientist? Well, it could be either, suggests the 8th grader. Tell us what you mean. If he's talking like an artist, it's a good thing. It's about having a vision. If he's talking like a scientist, it's a bad thing. It's about not being able to see the facts clearly. And which do you think he meant? I don't know. Maybe both. Maybe so. Do you know the first thing he wrote down whenever he sat down to write? She's writing on the chalkboard. Dimi chi mai fata alcuna cosa. Tell me if anything was ever finished. Spoken like a true artist, spoken like a true scientist. Let's look at something here from E.O. Wilson, the great Harvard biologist. Maybe that'll help. Behind Shakespeare, Leonardo, Mozart, Mrs. Hurd is reading from Wilson's book, are a vast legion whose realized powers form a descending continuum to those who are merely competent. What the masters possessed in common was a combination of exceptional knowledge, technical skill, originality, sensitivity to detail, ambition, boldness, and drive. They were obsessed. They burned within. They burned within. What Wilson was saying, explains Mrs. Hurt, who are now thoroughly engaged, is that if the measure is brain power, the difference between Shakespeare and Mozart and the rest of us is small. But if the measure is human drive, That's another story. Most of us have a working vocabulary of about 6,000 words. Shakespeare's was 60,000. And he wasn't born with that. He burned from within. He who is fixed to a star does not change his mind. But there is something else too, Mrs. Hurt continues reading. The masters, Shakespeare, Da Vinci, Mozart, they also had an intuitive grasp of inborn human nature, accurate enough to select commanding images from the mostly inferior thoughts that stream through the minds of all of us. Translating, they picked the right stories. She found a way to say it in a sentence. They picked the right stories. And in the case of Da Vinci, the artist and the scientist, sometimes he created the right story, and sometimes he discovered it. We thank Mrs. Hurt for letting us be part of her class today. We get back in the car and head out on the Nebraska roads. We're still in Nebraska. It's a big state. But it's 1910. A boy of 3 is being held aloft by his father, high over his head, as high as his arms will reach, just so he can see an arm's length better Halley's Comet as it streaks through the star-filled Nebraska sky. He makes a promise to his father right there in the spot that he will watch for it when he returns 75 years later. It's a promise he won't be able to keep. During his life, he studied the history of the planet and he explored the geography of the soul. He wrote about the world of memory and the world of forgetting. He wrote about the passing of time and of the eternal past. His father was a Shakespearean actor. His mother was deaf. He had 2 heroes, Charles Darwin and William Shakespeare. And he spent his whole life artfully passing between 2 worlds, art and science. And perhaps the most curiously amazing thing about Loren Eiseley's writing is that he lets the dance between art and science play out right there on the page in front of you. One moment, he's talking about a radar scanner sweeping the horizon for approaching disasters, and the next, he's talking about a white cabbage butterfly. He interrupts a revelation on Francis Bacon's theory on the mind of man with a moment spent watching a small bird drinking upside down from a slowly dripping faucet. And what's truly amazing is how he makes it work. We might say that Loren Eiseley was a man who was truly in touch with both his right brain and his left brain. He was a man in balance. But in some ways, it's more complicated than that, and in some ways, it's even simpler. If you've had the opportunity to watch Jill Taylor's TED presentation, the neuroanatomist who survived a blood vessel exploding in her left brain, then you know something about the story of the left brain and the right brain. She describes each hemisphere as having its own personality. The right brain lives in the present moment, the right here, the right now, Jill calls it, and it thinks in pictures. It has a ravenous appetite for sensory experience, how the present moment looks, how it smells, how it tastes, how it sounds, how it feels. The right brain lives and breathes for synapse rush. It sucks up all of this information and quickly throws it onto a blank canvas, and you end up with a kind of Jackson Pollock collage of the moment. The left brain is linear and methodical, and is all about the past and the future, and it thinks in language. It's about the little voice in your head. It breaks the huge Jackson Pollock collage down into detail upon detail and considers each detail as a kind of a math problem. It catalogs and sorts and considers each detail. The right brain creates this huge Jackson Pollock collage of sensory experience, and the left brain is the art critic, or maybe even more accurately, it's the art historian. It says, remember it has a voice, so it talks to you. It says, I'm going to take the smell of this crimson rose, for example, and run it through the data bank of the past and see what comes up. Weddings, funerals, proms, love. And then I'm going to take that same smell of crimson rose, now with all of these associated memories, and calculate any possibilities for the future. Is the smell of crimson rose going to make me pick up the phone, or buy a book, or choose a restaurant, or fall in love? And if I do any of those things, what are the chances of success or failure or happiness? The story of the left brain, right brain can be pretty complicated, but since we're all wired the same, it can also be pretty simple. Unless something goes wrong, the right brain is constantly creating the Jackson Pollock painting, and the left brain is constantly trying to make sense out of it. And we all have that little voice in our head. Sometimes we just pretend not to hear it. Loren Eiseley settled whatever border dispute there may have been between his left brain and his right brain very early in his life. And because of that, he became the master of the science essay. And if you've been to edge.com lately, you'll be glad to know the essay is back, for those of you who love essays. The title alone of a Loren Eiseley essay is enough to stir your imagination. The Star Thrower, The Unexpected Universe, The Ghost Continent, The Last Neanderthal, and his most famous, How Flowers Change the World. Over the centuries, countless writers have written countless descriptions of water. Da Vinci himself was obsessed with water and the way it moved. He studied it, he painted it, and he too wrote about it. But here, in one sentence, Loren Eiseley tells you everything you will ever want to know about water. If there's magic on this planet, it is contained in water. Eiseley was a scientist who wasn't afraid to use the word magic. He used it often. That and thistledown, the little wispy seeds that fill the air in late spring. For him, they were like ideas or truths that we keep chasing from moment to moment. And just when we think we have them nailed down, the wind comes along and changes everything. Thistledown. It's a word with two natures, one pointed and precise, and the other forgiving. Thistledown. Loren Eiseley was a great writer. There are never enough of them, at any time. He would have loved to have been around to hear the recent discovery that stars spin more slowly as they grow old. He would have found the science of it interesting, and he would have found the metaphor beautiful and irresistible. Perhaps Loren Eiseley's best line is the one he wrote for the headstone he and his wife share. It says simply, "We love the earth, but we couldn't stay."
It's coming on Christmas. They're cutting down trees. They're putting up reindeer and singing songs of joy and peace. So I wish I had a river that could skate away on. But it don't snow here. Stays pretty green. I'm gonna make a lot of money, then I'm gonna quit this crazy scene. Oh, I wish I had a river that could skate away on. I wish I had a river so long I would teach my feet to fly. Oh, I wish I had a river He tried hard to help me, he put me at ease. And he loved me so naughty, made me weak in the knees. Oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. So hard to handle, I'm selfish, I'm sad. Now I've gone and lost the best baby that I've ever had. I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I wish I had a river so long I could teach my feet to fly. Oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away on. I made my baby say goodbye. It's coming on Christmas. They're cutting down trees. They're putting up reindeer and singing songs of joy and peace. Oh, I wish I had a river I could skate away on.
Galileo was right. Something set in motion stays in motion. Ideas are like that. I think of them as a river of words, related and unrelated, eternally flowing by. And when I sit down to write, I choose carefully where and when I put my boat into the water. Once in, I let it catch the current. And sometimes I guide it, and sometimes I let it follow the way of the river. Sometimes I lead the words, and sometimes I let the words lead me. And knowing when to do one and not the other is the only thing I know about writing, and the only thing worth passing on. My kids are grown up, and it's been a long time since I read kids' stories to them. But one of my friends at work has 2 kids that he reads to every night, so I am very much in the know of kids' books. And one of the best around is The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And if you've not read this, shame on you. This award-winning children's book sold 30 million copies, was translated into 50 languages, and we will never be able to quantify how many times it inspired the line, "Read it again, Daddy." The author Eric Carle once said something very interesting about writing. He said, if you had to do a list of 10 things to know about writing, this would be one of them. I always say if you're writing an adult book, you start with a 20-word idea and build up to 200,000 words. When you do a kid's book, you start out with an idea that's 200,000 words, and you reduce it to 25. Writing assignment number 2, the story of your life in 25 words or less. Written like a kid's book. Make it real kid-friendly. 25 words or less. The story of you. Thank you. Just a couple more minutes. You're all still very young, so the story of your life can't take that long. One more minute, please. Okay, who wants to go first and tell us the story of your life written like a kid's story? Yes, Rachel. Excellent.
I don't know if it's a kid's story, but
Okay, story of your life, though.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you really have words? Mine's like 26, 27.
Okay, there's a small fee for that.
That's cool. Born a cold day near Thanksgiving, grew up to wear sparkly red headbands, to dream of things that come true, and live to lead others to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me feel good. That's cool. Yes. And I'm sorry, your name? Elizabeth.
Elizabeth knows the power of doing the rain dance in the kitchen with mom and dad. There's nothing she can't accomplish.
Nice. That's real nice. Inspiring. Yes. Somebody else. Sir. Yes, please.
I was born in LA. I lived in New York. I painted, I drank, I fell in and out of love on here.
That's your life, right? Excellent. Okay. How about somebody from Draft back there? Christina.
I was a leader at work and on the playground. Some say I'm serious, but at least I played. I always make sure to win.
Nice. Cool. And somebody back there? Yeah. And your name? I'm sorry? Carrie.
One day, a girl was born in England. She had a loving older sister and loving parents, and they played, ate, and traveled the world together. When she got sad, she would dance, but mostly she was just really happy.
Very cool. Okay. And sir?
I was born exactly 6 months away from Christmas, the son of a beautiful mother and supporting father, a wonderful childhood of strong values and love each grew largely here for you.
Nice. Yeah. A couple more. Just try. Yes. And your name is? Yes.
Georgia was born the youngest of three. She's our baby of the family, her dad used to always say. As she got older, so did everyone else. And Roshni's almost 22. She's the baby of our family, her dad still says.
Very nice. Yes.
My name is Ashley, and I've been Isabel. Well,
That's lovely. That's really lovely. This is a true story, told to me by James Dodd, a writer I met in our Hamburg office. It's a story of his grandparents who grew up in South Africa. And it's about the same time Nelson Mandela was growing up in South Africa. The grandparents of James Dodd were young and purposeful and filled with conviction. And then one day they met and they fell in love, and conviction began to mean something else. One night, the grandfather of James Dodd, who was also called James, asked for Elizabeth's hand in marriage. And she said, "Yes, but you must make me 3 promises." "And what are those?" asked James. "First, you must promise to never raise a hand at me." "Yes," said James, "I'm not a violent man. I can promise that." "Second, you must promise to have children with me." "Yes," said James, "I can promise I will do everything within my power to do that." "And third, you must promise that you will not die before I do." James thought about that one and said, "Yes, I will promise that." So they were married and they had a happy life, and James kept his promise and never once raised his hand in anger. James kept his promise, and they had 2 lovely children, a son and a daughter. And life unfolded for them like a map you could never quite fold back the same way. Cancer found James. He still had conviction, though, and he beat it back. But as these things go, the cancer came back. And late one night, in their bedroom, now arranged with 2 beds, the one for James a few feet closer to the bathroom, James says in the darkened room, "Elizabeth?" "Yes, James. Do you need something?" "Yes," says James. "I need for you to release me from my 3rd promise." I'm learning late in life to appreciate the term bittersweet, partly because of these 2 lines from a Sarah Teasdale poem. "I found more joy in sorrow than you could find in joy." And partly because of this story about Mr. Geller. Mr. Geller was a math teacher at Stuyvesant High School in New York City. He was intense, demanding, passionate. His catchphrase was, "Math is number 1." He's a math teacher. One student remembered her math grade was her lowest grade on an otherwise exemplary report card, but it was a Geller grade, and it was the one she was most proud of. Mr. Geller was chosen to deliver the commencement speech for the class of 2011, and this is a short excerpt from that speech. "I would like to thank the graduating class for having chosen me as your faculty speaker. I wondered, why me? I've been teaching math at Stuyvesant for 29 years and was never chosen before." By the way, 29 is a prime number. "There are exactly 2 factors for 29, 1 and 29. Maybe I was chosen for the approximately 5 basketballs that I confiscated from students during the 4 years at Stuyvesant, or the 17 Frisbees I took away, or the 113 decks of playing cards, or the 257 cell phones I took away and brought to Miss Damasek's office. In case you haven't figured it out, all those are prime numbers." No, I don't think so. I think that you heard 3 months ago that I have metastasized melanoma cancer in my lungs, and that you wanted to honor me for my passion for teaching math. Thank you for honoring me. It was a nice speech, as straightforward as it was heartfelt. And this is where the story should get sad, but instead this is where the story gets bittersweet, a word that I think Mr. Geller would have had heart for. Oh, Mr. Geller dies, of course. Science is science, and the outcome from metastasized melanoma cancer is a reproducible answer, not an unanswerable question. Anybody can do the math. But bittersweet, in the language of math, doesn't always add up. For example, Galileo, who figured out how the world worked with nothing more than his instincts and memory of a song his mother sang to him when he was a child. He was nearly hanged by the Pope. He was forced to recant, but he had his bittersweet moment. Years after his death, his body was moved to another location, and the person who moved him, out of reverence for the father of science, removed one of his fingers. You can see it today in the Museum of Science in Florence. It is ironic, given his troublesome relationship with the church, that the finger preserved under a glass dome is the middle finger of his right hand, fully extended. There's one school of thought that sees this as a sign that Galileo is gesturing to the heavens, which he helped explain. And then there's the other school of thought. Bittersweet, finding joy in sorrow. But that's not the end of the story. Centuries after Galileo's death, there's a science conference in Rome. In attendance, Stephen Hawking. He has an audience with the Pope and stuns those assembled by asking the Pope to absolve Galileo and recognize his accomplishments as the father of science. A remarkable request, courageous and completely unexpected, and there on the spot, the Pope agrees to clear Galileo's name, equally courageous and unexpected. And for Galileo, or what's left of him at the Museum of Science in Florence, a bittersweet ending. And what about Mr. Geller, math teacher from Stuyvesant High? On the day he died, he woke up from a deep, restful sleep, opened his eyes, and began to speak. His son, Jason, was spending the night in the hospital and tried to make out what his father was saying. These would turn out to be the last words of Mr. Geller, math teacher. Jason said that it was hard to understand him at first, but then he realized he was saying, "Take one and pass it down. Take one and pass it down." Now, the thing about bittersweet is you're never quite sure if it's okay to laugh, but it's okay to laugh. He could have been delirious and was just recalling something he had repeated over and over again as a teacher, but I don't think so. I don't accept that ending from Mr. Geller. I say he saw that the beauty in math is the beauty in life. What he meant, I'm sure, was take one from the book of Galileo, perhaps his study on motion. Take one from the pages of Picasso and see that we create what has always been in front of us. Take one from the most beautiful woman in the world. Take one from Pavlov. Take one from the poets and from the teachers of one-room schoolhouses in Nebraska. Take one and pass it down to those who will inherit the earth from us. That's what he meant. I'm sure of it. Draw a line, an imaginary line, from the tip of my finger to the center of the earth. Using the center of the earth as your starting point, begin to walk along that line. Choose a pace and stick with it. Remember Galileo? Didn't matter what song he sang, he just needed to pick one song and stick with it. Sing it the same way every time in order to keep time like a clock. So choose a pace and start walking. From the center of the earth to the tip of my finger. Even if you choose a brisk pace, you'll walk for more than 100 days before you see any sign of life. More than 100 days, and then it's just microscopic bacteria. Continue walking at the same pace toward the tip of my finger, and then in the direction of the moon, and you'll walk past everything on this planet that is living in less than 30 seconds. Then you're out in space, and that's all there is of our living world. A precariously thin circle of life around a massive, lifeless core of rock. And in that 30-second circle, in that circle of life, is everything we know, everything we ever knew, every discovery, every invention, all that has been thought and fought and imagined. The great works, written and unwritten, the great wars, won and lost, for great causes, remembered and forgotten. Along with innocence and eloquence, an entire species of animals and plants that flourished and hunted and migrated, like the indigo bunting, navigating by the stars it had memorized while still a baby in its nest. And we watched in wonder, all of it. The rise and fall of microbes and empires, the shifting of land masses, and the opening of another Chuck E. Cheese's. We saw it, we painted it, we studied it, we wrote poems about it, and all the while, a few light years or a few galaxies away, somebody else with telescopes our telescopes can only dream about watched the whole thing. And what they saw was a slight shift, ever so subtle, a slight shift in color from gray to blue. That's it. They made a note of it in their journal that day and then went home to the ordinary lives people on the other planets live, feeling nothing at all what the people on the other end of the telescope felt, the people of NASA, who near the completion of the Voyager 2 mission in 1989, the incredibly persistent and precise spacecraft whose 12-year mission would take it past Jupiter in 1979, and Saturn in 1981, and finally on to Neptune in 1989, where traveling at 19 kilometers per second, Galileo was right, something set in motion stays in motion, or in muscle car terms, traveling at 42,000 miles per hour, it would pass within 3,000 miles of the North Pole of Neptune. And just before it was meant to leave our solar system, just before it was meant to retire to a pleasant life in the cosmos, studying ultraviolet sources among the stars, just as it was about to do that, the people of NASA couldn't resist. They sent a signal to Voyager 2, and they turned the camera completely around so that Voyager was traveling forwards, looking backwards over its shoulder. And looking back, they took a picture of Earth, a small blue dot in a single beam of sunlight. And that, should anyone ever ask you, is the definition of art. And at the time, nobody asked why they turned the camera around. But should anyone ever ask you, they turned the camera around, not for science, but for the same reason. When your parents dropped you off at school, you wanted to be brave and start off on a new adventure, but you couldn't resist. You looked back over your shoulder, and you took a picture of that moment. That's why the people of NASA turned the camera around. They couldn't resist. They had to see what home looked like from so far away from home. And that, should anyone ever ask you, is what defines us. Is it any wonder then that the rules that govern the life cycle of the African wildebeest, and I bet you didn't hear that line coming, are not so different than the rules that govern the sonnets of Shakespeare? How could they not? The rhythm of life is the rhythm of life, whether it's found in the Sahara or in a sonnet. Abraham Lincoln was delivering the Gettysburg Address. In the same breath, Alexander Graham Bell was saying, "Mr. Watson, come here." Mark Twain was taking us on a raft trip down the Mississippi just as the ink was drying on the first run of the Gutenberg press. And Darwin shares the same bit of digital space with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Life takes time. Just not quite as much as we think it should. So then there just remains one question, the question that's been around almost as long as the circle of life. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? It's the same question we've asked generation after generation, always a little different, always the same. It's the question about our two natures, thistledown, bittersweet. The one that begins every sentence with a question, how many, how often, how fast, how far, how old, how young, looking for a measure, validation, and measure again. And the other that recognizes a question about dancing angels will always be an unanswerable question. And getting those two natures to fit together, side by side, on the head of a pin, that's what it's all about. If we can do that, if we can ever do that, in the sheer silent wonder of that moment, we'd be able to hear that pin drop. Art and science have been trying to dance together on the head of a pin since the very beginning. A slow dance for the ages, with Galileo keeping time. If the calliope hummingbird can migrate 5,000 miles every year, if a baby indigo bunting can memorize the patterns of stars in the night sky, if we ourselves can rise up from a moment in time when our very being was measured in the hundredths of an inch, then, surely, we can take the lead and in perfect 3/4 time, dance a slow dance from here to there, across the stars and mist of Carl Sandburg's Clark Street Bridge. Thank you very much.